located in New Britain, Connecticut, in Willard Hall. The person being interviewed today is Donald Houldcroft, Houldcroft, born August 12, 1938. He now resides at 264 Main Street in Newington, Connecticut. He's been interviewed by Tanisha Brown. So just going to start with some questions to jog his memory. Where were you drafted, or were you enlisted, or did you enlist?
At that time, the draft was in effect, but I wouldn't have been drafted perhaps for another year after I signed up. So what I did initially when I went into the Army, I went in and had them advance my number to be drafted. So essentially the same as enlisting.
Where were you living at that time?
I was living in Newington.
How old were you?
I was 17.
Right out of high school?
Right out of high school. Graduated in June. Went in the Army, U.S. Army in August.
Why did you join?
Why did I join? Because I wanted to gain some kind of skills, which I didn't have. I wanted to see the world, so to speak, to meet different people.
Why did you pick the service branch you joined?
Well, I figured the Army, I guess my initial choice of the Army was the fact that my dad had been in the Army, my brother had been in the Army, so that's why I initially selected the Army.
When you say initially, did you switch to another service?
And then after I spent 2 years in the Army and my time was up, I got out of the Army, my enlistment was up, and returned back to Connecticut. And at that time the economy wasn't that great and there weren't a lot of jobs, and I was still uncertain as to what I wanted to do. So I decided that I would, go back into the service, but felt that the opportunities in the Navy as far as education and skills were more available. So I selected the Navy.
Do you recall your first days in the service?
Pardon?
Do you recall your first days in the service?
Yes.
Can you explain your feelings, or?
Well, it was certainly a feeling of getting used to all different kinds of people, giving up your privacy, having to experience different kinds of foods and schedules, and living with all kinds of other people. I mean, no privacy, things like that. It was pretty traumatic change from civilian life into the military, but I enjoyed it. I mean, I had mostly good days. I can't say I didn't have bad days, but at the end of when I first went into service in the Army, at the end of my basic training, I was assigned to Fort Sam Houston in Texas in the medical corps, and received, I think, about 2 or 3 months of training there. And after that, I was shipped overseas to Tokyo, Japan, to the U.S. Army Hospital in Tokyo, which was 2 blocks from the Ginza. And Japan was just great. I mean, it was that's what spoiled me. And I had wonderful people to work with. I worked with, my fellow enlisted men, and I worked with great doctors and nurses, and really enjoyed it. So that kept my attitude very positive.
And you did the same thing again in the Navy?
And then after I was released from the Army and enlisted in the Navy, I got out of the Army in August of 1956. And I entered the Navy in December of 1950. Excuse me. I got out of the out of the Army in 1958 after 2 years, August. And then enlisted in the Navy in December of 1958. And I had to go through just 1 month of of orientation to the Navy. And after that, I was assigned to Hospital Corps School at Great Lakes, Illinois for 16 weeks. After that, I was assigned to National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland, and went through another 8 weeks of training. After that, I was assigned to the Naval Hospital at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and I spent 3 years there, just about 3 years, and then re-enlisted and went to another school for 20 weeks, a school that qualified me for duty aboard a small ship that had no medical officer, sort of like a physician's assistant type of program. So then I was on a minesweeper out of Charleston, South Carolina, which is a small ship, only had 60 people aboard, and spent 3 years on that ship. And then when my shore duty came up again, I went to another school for another 16 weeks of medical administration. After that, I was assigned to the Naval Hospital in Newport, Rhode Island. And when I rose in rank, I was assigned after my tour duty there, which was, I think, 3 or 4 years, as I recall. Then I went from Newport, Rhode Island to, I'm trying to think. Give me a... I was assigned to the Naval Supply Center in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. I spent 2 years there as my title was medical director, which I had a dispensary. I had 2 enlisted men working for me, plus a civilian nurse. And my duties involved not only medical duties, but also handling the medical supply, technical advice to the commanding officer on medical supply for the Western Pacific region. And it was a very nice job, 2 years there. After that, I was assigned to the Fleet Marine Force in Vietnam, spent a year in Vietnam, then returned to Newport Naval Hospital for another 3 years.
Can you expand on your time at Vietnam? How was that?
Vietnam, I was at a battalion aid station. When I initially got there, I was at a small ammunition dump. And it was a sort of out in the boondocks, so to speak. And we used to get rocketed and, you know, small arms fire all the time. But, and then a few times the Viet Cong tried to penetrate the barbed wire around there. And so circumstances ensued that made you a little bit nervous. But, you know, actually it wasn't, we did have, you know, people were wounded occasionally.
So that was part of your job assignment in Vietnam, was taking care of the...
Right, right. And people were wounded occasionally, but I mean, it wasn't vicious, prolonged battles. After Vietnam, I returned to Naval Hospital Newport, and my job at the Naval Hospital at that time was Training and Education Office, which I ran, and was the administrator for the training program of the enlisted. After that job, that was about 3 years, I really didn't like that job, a desk job. I'm not a desk type person. And so I terminated my shore duty and went aboard a destroyer, USS Newman K. Perry, which was home ported in Newport, Rhode Island. I spent 2 years on the Newman K. Perry, and then when they transferred it to the reserve fleet, I transferred to the USS Charles P. Cecil.
So where were those ships heading? They were just hanging off the shores?
The Newman K. Perry, we used to make Mediterranean cruises, Caribbean cruises. We would go down and patrol. But during the, we'd go down to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba for training and things like that. Then after they decided to transfer the Charles B. Cecil to the reserve fleet, they shifted us to New London, Connecticut as our home port. And I spent the remaining time on the USS Charles B. Cecil out of New London, Connecticut. And we made Caribbean cruises and med cruises. And then I retired.
Do you have any memorable moments while you were in Vietnam that kind of sticks out?
Memorable moments, I guess probably the most memorable moment I had was when I was back at the main camp. That was when the time of all the turmoil and unrest and a lot of racial problems that were happening in the service at that time. And there was an incident where 3 grenades were thrown in to a listed men's club during a floor show. And we had like 65, 70 people wounded. And I don't know if they ever did decide who did that, but it was a racially motivated type of thing. So that was pretty awesome and pretty, but those things usually didn't occur, you know, out in the smaller areas. But it was.
Location in Vietnam where you were off, not too near the battlefield and more of the outskirts of
Well, at different periods of time in Vietnam, I was spent at different, you know, places. So some of them were. Vietnam, of course, had no battlefield, so to speak. You know, everything was a battlefield. But the main, I wasn't on patrols, you know, because my rank was too high at that time. So unlike a lower ranking person who had to accompany the Marines on patrol, I didn't have to do that.
So what was your duties during that time?
I was more or less like an administrator. And I worked for our battalion surgeon was a doctor, very nice person, and I had like 15 or 16 enlisted men working for me. And we had to dispense, you know, sick bay or battalion aid station and things like that.
What year was it when you went to Vietnam?
In 1969, I spent from November 1969 to November of 1970. And I was, initially when I arrived in Vietnam, I was at Da Nang, the Marine Corps base at Da Nang, and then from there into these subunits which were on the outskirts, and then back at Da Nang. And
The Navy transferred you throughout, or that was your decision to?
no, I mean they just transferred where you needed. Well, other than, you know, somebody maybe occasionally shooting at you or somebody throwing rockets at you, I guess that was the extent of my combat.
Did you receive any medals or awards while in Vietnam?
Other than, you know, our unit citation, our campaign ribbon, Vietnam Service Medal, but no individual awards for valiant bravery or things like that.
And you were never injured again, correct?
No, I was never injured that I can remember.
So how did you stay in touch with your family while in the service?
Well, at that time, of course, there was no email or normally with letter writing. Uh, I was not one to telephone a lot. I did telephone occasionally, but most of the time it was letter writing.
What was the food like?
The food, the Navy usually had good food aboard ships. Now, the Marine Corps, when I was in Vietnam, the food was not good. It was usually, at that time, sea rations, or if there was a hot meal, it really wasn't hot. It was usually cold, and it wasn't very good. But of course, you know, you were in a combat zone, so you had to expect those type of things.
Did you feel any pressure or stress during that time?
Any what?
Pressure or stress during that time?
Mainly, sometimes I would get boredom, you know, when you didn't have a lot to do. That was mainly, but as far as stress from being shot at, and you know, which was infrequent, probably not, you know, I mean, certainly wasn't pleasant, but it was something that I didn't, you know, wasn't devastated over.
Did you do anything special for good luck?
Anything special for good luck?
Or you didn't think about?
Well, we had at the battalion aid station we all stayed at the battalion aid station. It was surrounded by sandbags, bunkers. So whenever we got rockets, we just ran into the bunker, and we felt pretty safe there.
How did you entertain yourself?
Pardon?
How did you entertain yourself?
Well,
Sometimes that.
usually we drank beer. And those kind. I wasn't a card player. We used to have. We'd get from the Marines maybe not legally, but we'd get like steaks and we'd barbecue, because the chaplain was one of our friends, and so we would get the chaplain, and we'd have a picnic, you know, when it was safe to do so. And then, you know, you weren't really over there once a week maybe, or once every couple of months they'd have a floor show, you know, if you went to the club, which wasn't open all the time.
Any entertainers that came over from you?
Yes, we had regular floor show acts. Now, I don't know if, I guess sometimes they were USOs, sometimes paid acts. You had a couple R&Rs, where at the end of a certain period of time, they gave you a trip to like Hong Kong. Or I went to Hong Kong and I went to Taiwan. And then I went to Okinawa for a few days on official business, which was almost like a vacation.
What do you do in Okinawa?
Well, I mean, I was supposed to be taking some medical equipment there, and you know, it turned into be a vacation.
Did you pull any pranks or anything on each other?
Constantly, but you know, those are mostly the younger guys. But I had the people I served with, the people that worked for me in Vietnam, the younger corpsmen were, you know, fine people, and I was very close to them and really enjoyed them. And we all helped each other out. We probably drank too much beer. We didn't have a lot of drug abuse among that group. I mean, compared to like some of the Marines at that time. But that's when the drug abuse was going really big. And we felt very close to each other, very close to each
Did you
other.
happen to lose anyone during that time, did you?
No. fortunately. I mean, I had some of my younger corpsmen had to go out on patrols, but fortunately they always got back safely.
And what did you do while you were on leave? You normally go back home while you're on leave, or?
During the whole 20 years?
And within that time?
Oh, within Vietnam?
Yeah.
Well, as I say, I went to Hong Kong and did, you know, the regular tourist things, and then the same thing in Taiwan, and it was pretty nice because I had plenty of money. I mean, I think when I went on my R&R from Vietnam to Taiwan, I think I landed in Taiwan. I must have had $5,000, you know, that I could have spent in 5 days. At that time was pretty cheap. But, you know, I got to see a lot of things and did what usual. It was enjoyable.
How did you end up in Vietnam?
Vietnam, as a hospital corpsman, probably over a period of time, you would eventually have a tour of duty in Vietnam, and my turn came.
It was usually about 1 year or so?
1 year, yes. Everybody was, at that time, was limited to 1 year, unless you volunteered to stay longer, which some people did.
So you had options.
Right. Because people were Marines, sailors, whoever was Army, whoever was over there. Some people enjoyed it. You know, you were over there tax-free. You didn't pay any income tax when you're there. Plus the fact that you got combat pay, which wasn't very much, but.
How did you feel when your time came?
I was looking forward to it as an adventure. I didn't. Well, I mean, I didn't. The fact that I might possibly be injured or never entered my mind. I mean, it was, hey, a new place to go. But I did have friends that I had known throughout the Navy that I know people that did get killed over there. So, you know, it could have happened to me just as easily.
That was before you ended up in, you found out before you went to Vietnam that you
Right. But, you know, and the fact that I was chief petty officer by that time was, and unless a bomb hit me directly, or unless I was at a battalion aid station that got overrun by the Vietnamese, you know, I probably was more or less shot at. Yeah, I mean, shot, and a rocket hit me or something like that, it probably, most likely, I wouldn't have been injured. The children's hospital that we was run by an NGO, and we used to volunteer to work there. The hospital corpsman, we'd go down there a couple of days a week. Everybody would take turns.
So you saw a lot of injuries from children during that time period?
Well, there was, you know, they weren't there just there for injuries. They were diseases and whatnot, you know, all sorts of things. And the interesting thing about that is we knew when we were going to get rocketed because all the parents would come down and take their kids out of the hospital.
Oh, so that was kind of warning sign.
Right. So that was kind of an indication that something was going to happen. But it was, plus we used to volunteer to work at an orphanage. There was one Catholic-run orphanage, and we'd go over there and, you know, and work with the kids. But plus, we used to go out 2 or 3 days a week out into some of the villages, the Vietnamese villages, and we would do medical aid.
So what was an average day like for you?
An average day was work. We usually got up early. We worked, actually it was 7 days a week you worked. Sundays we'd kind of slack off a little bit. But we had sick call to hold for the Marines, plus all these activities, all other activities.
Such as?
Such as with the with the volunteer things, and plus, you know, we had to medically inspect the dining halls and things like that. So we had a lot of duties. I'll turn it on. My service ended in April of one day in April of 1976, right from New London submarine base. No, excuse me. The ship was home ported in New London, but at that time we were down in Norfolk, Virginia, and so we were training some Connecticut reservists, some Connecticut Navy reservists. So the ship was down in Norfolk, Virginia, and so my time was up, and I had my retirement papers and the ceremony and all that. So then I just flew back with the reservists back to Connecticut.
So from the period of when you left Vietnam to when you actually retired, what did you do in the interim?
Well, when I left Vietnam in
You stayed for about 4 more years before you...
1970, then I went back to the Naval Hospital, Newport, Rhode Island, and then from there to the ships.
What were the days and weeks after you retired? How were those in adjusting to civilian life?
Well, it wasn't really a problem because I was almost immediately enrolled in UConn down at Storrs. So my day was pretty busy. And I commuted between Newington and Storrs.
And your education was supported, I guess, by the GI Bill?
Yeah, not entirely, because it wasn't, you know, obviously wasn't enough. But fortunately, Connecticut had the program where if you were a veteran, you received tuition free, didn't pay tuition. So you had your books and your other things. So that was a real benefit.
Did you make any real close friendships while in the service?
Yes, there is my friend in Boston that I still correspond with. I have friends in Rhode Island that I still, because I spent a lot of time in Newport, so I have friends there. So we don't get together as often as we should, but we do get together occasionally.
And you try to continue with those relationships?
Yeah, you know, I mean, people lose contact with each other eventually. But
You guys kind of reminisce on your older times?
well, not exclusively.
Did you join any veteran organizations after?
Yes, I'm a member of the VFW and the Fleet Reserve Association, which are two veterans organizations. And I mainly keep my membership up for Veterans Affairs, you know, mainly to support Veterans Affairs legislation in Congress and things like that. In Vietnam, when I was in Vietnam, the Navy and the Marine Corps were drafting. It wasn't all volunteer. They were drafting into the Marine Corps and Navy. Not as much as the Army, but they did drafts. And so I had my Marine driver for the medical department was a draftee.
So do you think the draftees felt a little bit different than the ones that enlisted into the Army?
Well, I think, you know, supposedly a lot of the draftees were there not because they wanted to be, so maybe I'm not really sure what the statistics are as far as whether they had more problems or less problems, but I thought that was an important point to mention compared to today where it's all volunteer.
What did you do after, what career did you do after the war? What career did you take on after you left?
The Navy. After I retired, and then I went to UConn, got my degree in animal science. After that, I went to University of Arkansas, got my master's degree. And I went to University of Arkansas because it was one school I could afford. And it was a nice area. I don't know, in northwest, it's in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Got my degree in animal science, and then I taught. A friend of mine had a job at Northeast Missouri State University teaching animal science. He was working on his PhD, but he didn't want to take the job until he had finished his dissertation, writing his dissertation. So the department had said, well, if you can find somebody to fill in for you, while, for 6 months, you can, still have the job. So he called me from, I guess he was from Missouri, and he asked me if I had a job yet. I said no. He said, well, would you fill in for me for this semester? I said, sure. I said, I never taught, before in that setting, so I did, and I had 2 classes a week, a senior class and a freshman class. 2 freshman classes, no, 3 classes. And the students thought I was an interesting person because, of course, I wasn't, mostly them, they were just farm boys and, from the local area. So they hadn't met too many people from the East. So anyway, I enjoyed it. I thought that was really cool. And I, taught those classes, and my department head was very satisfied with me. And after, that was only a temporary contract. In order to get a permanent contract, you would have to have a PhD, which I didn't want to shoot for. So then is when I returned back to Connecticut, worked in the alternate education program in Hartford, and then while I was getting my certification here at Central, and then got certified, applied to a lot of jobs in Connecticut. At that time, teaching jobs were really hard to get. This was in 80s or somewhere around then. And Las Vegas came to interview out in at the Marriott Hotel in Farmington, and so I signed up for the interview and got hired about 9 months later. I moved out to Las Vegas, taught 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grades over the course of the 20 years, and taught at a at-risk school. And my last probably 12, 13 years taught mainly second language students, Hispanic.
How do you think your military experience kind of influenced how you chose other things in your life?
How did it influence my teaching?
Yeah, influence your teaching or your career path you decided to take after you left. Do you think it had any influence on you?
Well, you're more assertive and you're more confident. I think that's, for a teacher, that's important. And so, despite the fact that I was a beginning teacher, I wasn't in the same situation as maybe some young person right out of college that had never been in a different situation. So, I mean, plus I had some rough kids.
How did your service and experience affect your life?
In a positive way. It gave me an education. It gave me exposure to parts of the world I would never have gone to. And it gave me an opportunity to meet all kinds of people, a diversity of cultures and sociological backgrounds. And not everybody was the greatest, but I mean, most people I met I have a high regard for.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Celebrate Veterans Day and support your troops.
Well, Donald, thank you very much for sharing your experience.
You're quite welcome. I hope it's been beneficial to you.